Hi everyone, this is my run on the Caravan of Hope Lufenia stage, which is Karen's Lost Chapter Lufenia stage. And as always, before going into the battle, I'll be giving a quick overview on the party setup and the fight mechanics. I will also be including a timestamp in the video description that you can use to skip ahead to the section that you are interested in. So this fight has two waves, which I guess is a little bit unusual for a Lufenia stage nowadays. And the first wave consists of 3 Word Tigers. And the first wave is pretty straightforward. Really, there's only 2 things that you need to take note of. Firstly, the Word Tigers have an AoE attack called Lightning Bolt, which is a very harmless group brave attack. However, if any party members at any time during the first wave drops below 50% health, Lightning Bolt will change to the plus variant, which is more or less like an orb attack. It dispels your entire party's buffs and it deals AoE brave and HP attack. So which means that at any time during the fight on the first wave, you do not want to let any party members' HP drop below 50%. And of particular note, of course, would be Odin, who through his LD use will drop his HP to 0 and will therefore trigger the plus version of the Lightning Bolt attack. So if you are using Odin, you need to either bring in a strong healer to quickly heal up after he uses his LD, or hold off on using his LD until you reach the second wave. Second thing to note of in the first wave is the Ferocious Roar mechanic that the Word Tigers have. So every few turns or so, you will see the Word Tiger in the middle using Ferocious Roar, and it starts off at Ferocious Roar 1 and it gradually builds up to Ferocious Roar 6. Each time it builds in level, it raises all 3 Word Tigers' attack, defense and speed, which isn't actually that bad because all of their other attacks are just brave attacks anyway, unless they of course amass significant amounts of bravery. However, once they hit Ferocious Roar 6, it automatically changes their Lightning Bolt to the plus variant regardless of how much HP you have. So in short, the first wave is also sort of like a DPS race. Although there isn't any Lufenia Orb present in the first wave, essentially you need to kill off the Word Tigers before they reach 6 stacks in their Ferocious Roar ability. The Ferocious Roar is also an aura and it's not a buff. So for one thing, you cannot tell what stack they are in other than looking at the message prompt when they use the move. And for the other thing about this is that because it's an aura, it cannot be dispelled. So the only way to get around this is to kill them off before they reach 6 stacks. So the solution to this is pretty straightforward in that you just need to bring heavy hitters to your party to ensure you have enough DPS to kill them off before they reach 6 stacks of Ferocious Roar. Coming to the second wave. Second wave has a pair of Wall Sharer, and essentially I'll just be referring to them as bears because they look like bears. The first thing to note coming into this is that if you look at the elemental attributes and the attack resistances, you notice that they have a lot of elemental absorption. So they absorb every element in the game except only for lightning and holy element. This means that characters who rely on elemental damage, and I think a good example here would be Vivi, who relies on fire and dark element, would be locked out of this fight. And you need to either use characters with either holy or lightning element, or characters who are not tied to any element in the game. Beyond that, there are also heavy resistance to range damage, and the way to go of course then is to bring either melee or magical. If you have range characters, and a good example in this fight would be Trey. you do need to pair them with an elemental enchanter or impaler such as Kuja or Dash in this fight to allow them to bypass the range resistance. So in total for the second wave, there are 3 things that I think you need to take note of and prepare accordingly to ensure you have the highest chance of success in this Lufenia fight. And first and foremost, of course, would be the Lufenia Orb. And the Lufenia Orb, in some aspects, is very similar to the Lufenia Orb in the Sephiroth stage, in the sense that there is nothing that will pause or increase the orb counter here. You can of course use burst or summon mode as always to pause the orb counter, but beyond that, nothing stops the orb from ticking down. So in a sense, this is also a DPS race orb, but the HP triggers that dispels the orb or resummons the orb is a little bit tricky, and it depends on which stage of the fight you are in. So similar to the Sephiroth Lufenia stage, the orb appears right at the start of the battle, and it appears at a count of 25. And the orb at the start of the battle will stay until both bears hit 79% HP threshold, at which point the orb will disappear. After that, you have a period of time from the 79% to 49% HP threshold where the orb will not be present, and during that time it's just a matter of doing slow and steady damage to them. So in that circumstance, it's very similar to the imps in Sephiroth's Lufenia stage. There is one difference here in the first phase, in the sense that to make the orbs disappear at 79%, both bears need to hit the 79% threshold. If only one bear hits 79% mark and the other bear is still above 79%, the orbs will still remain on both bears. Hence why they say the cancel here is that the party HP falls below 80%. So both bears need to fall below 80% to trigger both orbs disappearing at once. Now at 49% health, and this time is a bit different. So at 49% health, the orb will appear, and the orbs will appear on both bears when only one bear first hits 49%. So in case you are considering using a strategy of bursting down one bear, if you leave one bear at a very healthy range, say about 70% HP, and the other bear falls below 50%, unfortunately it will trigger Lufenia Orb on both bears, and you then have the impossible task of DPSing a very healthy bear down. So the way to get around this is to ensure, or try to ensure, that both bears hit 49% at roughly the same time, and then you then have the window of time to deal with the Lufenia Orb respectively. So again, when one bear falls below 50% health, the orb will appear on both bears. And the second time the orb appears at 49% health, the orb comes at a count of 15, which seems quite low, but the orb will actually this time disappear whenever a bear falls below 30% HP. So essentially, you just need to DPS down the bear from 49% to 29% mark before the orb ticks down to 0. Now, to make things a bit more complicated, there is another phase after that. So at 29% health, when the HP bar is red, the orb will disappear. However, at the 29% mark, the bears will also gain a red aura, and I will go more into the red aura slightly after this. But essentially, at 29% mark, the bears will gain the red aura, and the red aura will guarantee that their next attack will be Spear Shot or Spear Shot Plus, depending on whether or not you get to break them. And the bears using Spear Shot will trigger the orb reappearing again, this time with a count of 10. And there is no way to avoid this because the spear shot is a guaranteed attack that the bears will do at 29% health. The only way to avoid the final orb is to permanently delay the bears, but it's going to be very difficult because the red aura will significantly reduce the damage that you do. So essentially at a 29% health, the orb will disappear from the previous phase but will reappear again with a 10 count the moment the bears use their spear shot after having the red aura. It may sound a bit confusing, but I will go more into it during the actual battle itself, and I'll explain it phase by phase, as well as put a more detailed description in the video description here. And when the final orb appears at the count of 10, you do need to kill the bears off before it ticks down to 0 because the orb will never disappear after that. So that's it for the orb. The best thing to consider for the orb is that the first 20% health, so from 100% to 79% health, is pretty straightforward. You do not need to waste your summon or burst, and as long as you have some heavy hitters in your party, you should be able to comfortably bring the bears down to 79% before the orb triggers off. From the 49% to 29%, it can be a little bit tricky, and my recommendation here is to consider, if you have a burst mode, to use a burst at the 49% mark, or otherwise to bring in your summon friend unit to help you in the damage area from the 49% to 29% mark, because an orb count of 15 is pretty tight. At the last 29% health, after they use spear shot and resummon the orb, my advice here is to just go into summon mode at this point in time and burst them down in the summon mode. So I did briefly mention the red aura, and the red aura is the second thing that you need to watch out for in this fight. The red aura does have slightly different HP triggers than the orb appearing and disappearing, so that can make the fight a little bit confusing, but again I will put a more detailed overview in the video description, so you can refer to that if you need some sort of notes. So the red aura appears 3 times on the second wave. The first time is similar to when the orb disappears, which is at 79%. So at 79% health, while the orb disappears, both bears will actually gain the red aura. And when the red aura appears, it's very important to note that it will dispel all debuffs on the bears, which means that you will need to reapply any important debuffs that you have. In addition, the red aura will also reduce all brave damage done to 1, essentially significantly cutting down the DPS that you deal. To make matters worse, when they get the red aura, they also battery themselves fully to about 64,000 brave, and their next attack will either be spear shot plus or spear shot. When the red aura is up, the next attack will be spear shot plus if you do not manage to break them in time. If you manage to break them while they're in the red aura, their next attack will be just a regular version of spear shot. Spear shot plus is a very deadly attack. Both variants are guaranteed hits, but spear shot plus dispels buffs on a single target before the attack starts, and it also has a brave hit to it, which significantly increases the damage. So from what I can see, spear shot plus usually deals about 17 to 20,000 damage, and in most cases should be enough to one-shot a character. If you manage to break the bears in the red aura state, they will instead use spear shot, and spear shot is a very survivable attack. It doesn't have a brave hit component, and it doesn't dispel any buffs, so it's just a battery into HP attack, which is very easily survivable and tankable with most tanks in the game. The issue though is that it's very difficult to break the bears when the red aura is up, because they have about 64,000 brave, and any brave hits will deal 1 bravery point of damage. So to get around this, you have to either utilize gravity-based characters, such as using Sephiroth's EX ability, Penelo's EX ability, Edward's LD, or XDev, who can gravity shave down to 0 and thereafter allowing you to break the bears, or using characters with instant break attacks. Personally, I think instant break attacks are the better way to go, and the best example I would imagine in this case would actually be Struggle. Struggle is good because he has instant break built into his kit, but very importantly, he is also a very strong AoE damage dealer, which significantly helps on both waves of the fight. So if you have Struggle built up, this is an excellent place to be using him. Other than Struggle, there are other instant break characters. So for example, Gabrant also has instant break in his kit. Trey has instant break in his kit as well, but Trey is a ranged character, which means that if you're using Trey, you need to bring some sort of enchanter and impaler to ensure he can still contribute to damage. And lastly, Odin also has instant break built into his EX, but again, if you're using Odin, you need to be careful on the first wave when you're using his LD. So assuming you get to break the bosses, and you actually need to allow them to take their turn to dispel the red aura. If you disable them with some sort of paralysis or sleep, for example, the red aura will not dissipate, it will continue to remain until they actually get to do Spear Shot. So Spear Shot in essence is an unavoidable attack. You need to face it, and the best thing, or the easiest, or the most straightforward way really, is to have some way to break the bears when they are in the red aura form. So I mentioned earlier the red aura appears 3 times in the fight, and that is at the 79%, at the 59%, so take note here 59% and not 49%, and lastly at the 29% mark of the fight. The third and final thing to take note of in this fight is actually the turn requirement, which requires you to complete in 90 turns. And it may sound very straightforward, but the tricky thing about this fight is that when the bears get the red aura, they actually push their turns back, which is actually supposed to give you enough turns to prepare to break them before they use Spear Shot Plus. But it also means that you will get about 5 to 6 turns where you're only dealing 1 bravery point of damage, which significantly cuts your DPS while wasting turn count. So 90 turns can be a little bit tight depending on your party composition and whether or not you have burst mode in your party. And you do need to take note about the turn count throughout the fight as well. So that's it for the 3 mechanics. Quickly covering the setup that I use and some recommended characters. First of all, considering that the first wave has 3 Were Tigers and the second wave has a pair of Were Bears that you actually need to damage evenly, this fight heavily favors AoE centric characters. So the aforementioned Struggle is actually a good pick because he also helps to deal with the instant break mechanics for the red aura. Beyond that, Kuja is actually a great character to be used here, not only because he deals heavy AoE damage, but also because he can enchant and imperil Holy, which allows your entire party to hit for weakness damage throughout the entire second wave, and that helps with the DPS aspect. Of course, if you happen to have Kuja's burst mode, that's also a bonus because you can then use his burst mode in the fight as well. Sephiroth is another good pick, mainly because he is synergy in the fight, and of course if you have his burst mode, that's also another option. And of course, very handily, his EX gravity shaves down to 0, so you can use his EX as a means to deal with the bear's red aura. And lastly, having some sort of tank is a good idea, and I used Gladio because he has the inbuilt party attack auras as well as passive HP healing, which helps a lot. And he also actually does contribute a little bit to the damage through his counter attacks as well. So the party that I ended up going with is Sephiroth, Kuja, and Gladio. Although personally, if you have a instant break character, I would actually recommend using an instant break character over Sephiroth. The reason I use Sephiroth is because I actually don't have any instant break characters built up other than Odin, and I don't want to use Odin in this fight. So I think using Strago or Trey or even Gerbrand might be a good idea over Sephiroth here. As for summon of choice, it's not very restrictive here, although you do need to take note that the boss or the second wave absorbs almost every element. So there's only either Ramo, Alexander, or non-elemental summons such as Odin or Bahamut which will work. And I think any of them is fine. And I use Odin mainly because of his defense down buff to the party, which helps on the DPS. When you are making a party, you do need to try to favor heavy hitters and preferably those who can deal AoE damage. So because this helps on the first wave to kill off the World Tigers before they get to 6 stacks, and of course on the second wave where you need heavy DPS to damage down the boss before the orb triggers to 0. So that's it, let's move on to the battle. I'll see you there. Okay, so starting on the first wave, like I mentioned, is pretty straightforward. The key here is to just try to keep the world best broken as long as possible to ensure that they do not land any HP attacks, because they can't actually do any HP attacks if they are in a broken state. And the other thing, of course, is to kill them off before they reach 6 stacks of Ferocious Roar, which is actually a very easy thing to do if you have prepared strong AoE DPS characters that you will actually need on the second wave anyway. So assuming you've done the right preparations and brought in a suitable team comp, the first wave is pretty straightforward, and you just need to keep them broken and damage them evenly for the entire fight. I did decide to use one of Sephiroths LD, one of Kuja's LD, and one of Gladio's LD right at the start of the first wave. Mainly it's just so that I can debuff them with Sephiroth's the frame debuff, and my Kuja goes to full stack straight ahead, and Gladio can help to protect the party and support damage in terms of his counter attack. So this helps me to have a very strong start at the beginning of the first wave. Beyond that, I would actually recommend to save all other LD users for the second wave, because the second wave is significantly more difficult than the first wave. Okay. So here you can see the War Tiger using Ferocious Roar 2, and every few turns or so they will use higher and higher stacks of Ferocious Roar, as I've mentioned. But really, at this point you can see I've dealt almost half their HP damage and they're only at 2 stacks of Ferocious Roar. So it is very doable to kill them off before they even reach Ferocious Roar 4 or 5, depending on which heavy hitters you have in your party. So I'll just fast forward the rest of the first wave because there is nothing else noteworthy here other than keeping the War Tigers broken throughout. Okay, so starting on the bears finally on the second wave, So they start off immediately with the orb at the start of the fight, and the orb is at 25 count. So the goal here is to have heavy DPS to ensure they hit 79% before the orb triggers off. Now, depending on what mechanic you have in place to deal with the red aura, you do have to prepare for the red aura that will come at 79% health. So for example here, if you're using a similar party comp as me and you're relying on Sephiroth's EX to deal with the red aura, you do need to try to time his EX so that it is ready when the bears hit 79% HP so that you can immediately use Sephiroth's EX to gravity shave the red aura. If you're using Gladio as well, I actually do recommend using his second LD right at the start of the wave 2 here, so that he helps to protect the party and contribute damage with his counter attack as well. The other reasoning behind this is at the later parts of the fight, you can use summon or burst mode or friend support unit to damage down the bears, and in those circumstances, Gladio's counter attack holds far less value because you won't be taking in attacks from the war bears. I also use Kuja's second LD here mainly because his LD buff is running low right at the end of the first wave. So using this helps to contribute to damage at the start of the second wave and refreshes his LD buff as well. If you can actually get by without using Sephiroth's LD here, I actually recommend not using Sephiroth's LD at the start here, mainly because all debuffs will be cleansed at 79% health, and if you can get by without his LD, it's actually better to save his LD for the later parts of the fight, especially the last 50% health. Okay, so both bears has hit the 79% threshold, and you can see this leads to both orbs disappearing and the red aura appearing here. You also notice that the bear's turn order has been significantly pushed back, and as I mentioned earlier, this leads you to taking about 5 to 6 turns where you're dealing significantly less damage, but it also gives you 5 to 6 turns to prepare and hopefully break the bears before they get their turn. So here I managed to charge up Sephiroth's EX again, and I use it to gravity shave the bears so that I can break them before the next attack. Okay, so both bears are broken, and this guarantees that their next attack will only be the regular spear shot, and this will happen even if they happen to regen their brave before they get their turn. Once the bears are broken in red aura, it will flag the change of spear shot plus to regular spear shot and leave it at spear shot until they get their turn. Okay, so Gladio tanked the spear shot, but really anyone could have taken it and survived because spear shot is pretty harmless. And the non-plus version doesn't actually dispel any of your buffs, which is a big bonus. So coming to the 79% health of the fight, at this part of the fight the orb has disappeared, and the goal here is to whittle the bosses down from 79% to 49% health, which is when the orb will reappear again. Throughout this phase, I really highly recommend to try and even out the boss's HP as much as possible, and having the HP indicator is a really big help here. Once they drop below 70%, which is roughly at this point, you do need to prepare for their next Red Aura attack. And again, notably, the next Red Aura comes at 59% health, which is sort of in the middle of this phase of the fight. And when they are roughly at about 65-68% health, if you are relying on EX moves to Gravity Shave or Break, you do need to want to quickly build up the EX meter, and if the EX meter is filled, you want to hang on to the EX so that you can quickly use it when the bears hit 59% health. Okay, so I've hit the 59% health, and both bears have resummoned the Red Aura again, dispelling all debuffs. So at this stage, it's the same strategy, so either use Gravity or Insta Break to break the bears before they get their next turn, which is it shouldn't be too difficult to do considering that their turns are pushed back. Another thing that I would also recommend at the 59% mark, once they get their Red Aura, is to reapply all debuffs. And if you have Sephiroths LD, I would really recommend to reapply his LD debuff here. Because when the orb appears at 49%, they won't actually dispel any debuffs, and having the LD up ready running will allow you to go at full speed, damaging the boss when the orb is out. Once you've managed to break the bears when they get their Red Aura at 59% health, you then need to start your preparation for the next phase of the fight, which is the orb appearing at 49% health. So if you want to pop your AA to get damage boosts or max bravery boosts and such, now's the best time to pop the AAs so that you don't have to waste turns using them when the orb is out. Okay, so you can see, so the bear B has HP dropped below 50%, and although bear A still has 50% HP, you'll notice that the orb appears on both bears. So this is why it's very important to keep them evenly damaged. If bear A happen to have like 60 or 70% health, you can imagine that you will have an orb count of 15 and it will be at 60 to 70% health, which is a very difficult HP number to shave down. At this point, you need to shave down the bears from 49% to 29% to make the orb disappear. And if you have any burst mode available to you, personally I think this is the best time to enter burst mode. If you don't have any burst modes available, the fight is still very achievable, and at this point I would actually recommend instead to bring in a friend unit that is oriented to DPS. For example, Lightning, Kuja, or Sephiroth. This is also the part of the fight where you may want to use powerful attacks such as LDs if you have them, and good example here would be Sephiroth LD if you haven't used it yet, or Kujas LD to help contribute to the damage. Beyond that, it shouldn't be too difficult and you should be able to bring the bears down to 29% quite comfortably. Of course, especially if you have access to burst mode. Now, one word of warning here is that the red aura will appear the moment a single bear drops to 29% health, regardless of what HP percentage the other bear is. And the ideal outcome that you should be aiming for is to drop both bears to 29% health or below at the same attack. Otherwise, you see what happened here to me. I brought just one bear down to 29%, and the bear triggers the red aura, but unfortunately the other bear is still at 30% health. And looking at the turn count here, this is by far the biggest problem I had in the run. I have to use Sephiroth's EX to gravity shave down bear A, but if I do that, bear B will then get the red aura and battery itself to max brave, and I wouldn't be able to shave it down. This is really the perfect example of why you should try to damage them down to 29% health at the same turn to avoid this problem that I'm now having. I thought it would be a run ender, but I decided to try to see whether Gladio can actually tank Spear Shot Plus because he is covering for the other two allies. So I held on to Sephiroth's EX for another turn, and I used Fervent Blow to trigger Red Aura on the second bear, and so that I can gravity shave both bears down at the same time. But if you look at the turn order, it's still not enough because right after I use Sephiroth's EX, bear A will still use Spear Shot Plus, and really at this point I had no choice but to hope that Gladio can tank the attack. Okay, so Gladio actually survived Spear Shot Plus. It's put him in the red, and the bad thing about it is all his buffs are dispelled. But given that I'm so near the end, I felt that I could still achieve the run. Bear B still has the red aura, but because he was shaved by Sephiroth's EX, I very easily break him to ensure that I don't have to eat Spear Shot Plus again. The other mistake I made here is I forgot to use Gladio's AA to heal himself when he had a turn. Not remembering that Gladio actually had to tank also a regular spear shot from Bear B. So my Gladio survived with just 300 HP, thank goodness for that. A lot of this is actually quite avoidable, don't make the same mistake I did. So if Gladio has to tank one spear shot plus, you can quickly use his AA to heal him back up to a reasonable amount of health. And you can just actually use his attacks to reapply buffs. Anyway, once you've dealt with the red aura at the last 29% health, and the red aura has been dispelled, I would recommend to use your summon then. Assuming you made this far into the fight, once summon is out, it should be pretty straightforward. The bears actually has less total HP than the imps in Sephiroth's Lufenia stage. So if you manage to bring them this far and they are at 20% health or below, you can deplete most of their remaining HP inside summon, as you can see here. I actually planned to bring in my friend unit inside summon, but as I was going through the turns, I realized that there wasn't a need to, because Kuja and Sephiroth actually held enough DPS to kill off the bears, and so I just felt that I can just finish the fight without bringing in the lightning support unit at all. And that's it. I hope this video has been helpful. As always, if you enjoyed the video, do leave a like, leave a comment or subscribe. It really helps a lot. Until then, I'll see you in the next Lufenia fight. Bye bye.